I've seen them since the beginning of the reform period. So my impression of China is really that over this time China has totally changed. Most people I meet now are fairly well off. They have changed completely. They are global citizens now. The private sector being now able to essentially support the Chinese economy was the biggest achievement. I have traveled in China, every province apart from Heilongjiang and Ningxia. All the others I've seen them since the beginning of the reform period. So my impression of China is really that over this time China has totally changed. If you start with the people in 79, everybody was thin and poor. Most people I meet now are fairly well off. They have changed completely. They are global citizens now. And that is reflected in the way you see buildings, the way cities have changed. When you used to travel from Shanghai to Suzhou, you could see lots of poor farming areas. If you go now, it's all industrial and high-rise buildings. So China is a different country from what it was. When I arrived in China, there was a planned economy and there was no business. You needed your liangpiao and your gupiao. If you wanted to buy things, people couldn't buy things. People had to rely on allocations. And I worked in finance with Chinese companies in the 1980s. And I saw how they had to struggle, how they had to get things into the annual plan, or if they had bigger projects, how they have to wait till they could get into the 5-year plan. All of this was very restrictive and very regulated. And I think the biggest change that China made was to allow private enterprises to emerge. I think it was important to have the policies coming from the top, and China had very smart politicians. I think the main effect really was that at local level, and I've seen that in Jiangsu, in Zhejiang, I've seen it in Shandong, so a number of provinces, how people were allowed to set up their own enterprises and to go for themselves. And that created so much confidence and changed people's mind. So they were not relying on the state, but they were relying on themselves. To make that possible, I think, was the biggest major change that China achieved. And part of that was, of course, to have local governments being able to support that. So this was a big policy change. The private sector being now able to essentially support the Chinese economy was the biggest achievement. In my early days in China, I was working as an interpreter for the embassy and was interpreting for Deng Xiaoping. At that time, nobody in the West knew what to do with China. Did it really want to do business, or was it just some passing change? For quite some time, people really did not know an answer. And that changed immediately as Deng Xiaoping came and suddenly was meeting Western politicians and business people. And people sat down with him and came away from these meetings and said, I trust him. I know where China is going. We believe China is going to be a reliable partner and is going to work with other countries. That started the breakthrough. That's, I think, one of my strong memories, to see how much difference one person made. Another memory, one of my other favorite memories, is doing interviews with private businesses in Hangzhou and Sunan, in these Jiangnan areas. We did hundreds of interviews and met people who were starting to do business. These people really managed, and that's a credit to their resourcefulness and their creativity. And one final point, I think, which is quite often overlooked, the role of women in the whole reform area is underplayed. We met so many entrepreneurs and female entrepreneurs and women who have taken responsibility, and they are a very big part. I think they don't get enough credit for that. I think the Chinese government has played a role in a whole range of different levels. At the central level, where you get the broad policy framework, and that sometimes is more in favor of business, sometimes it's more restrictive. So there are gradual changes. And the other side of the government I see at local government. That's down at county governments or even township, where you have local governments, you have local party secretaries who really play a very big role in allowing local enterprises to grow, to go into overseas markets, to expand. I think as long as these two work well together, then the Chinese economy is doing really well. If it wasn't for China, Australia would not have had 30 years of ongoing continuous growth that it had until last year. That was largely based on the ability of the Australian economy to supply raw materials to China and to work together very closely with China. So China has helped Australia to maintain economic growth, to guarantee the living standards that we have in Australia. Very much of that is based on Australia's cooperation with China. 我在这几年，就是这几十年，一个希望就是帮澳大利亚和中国建立友好长期的关系。目前双边关系是情况不是很理想的，是目前我们缺乏对话，所以我希望在很快的将来，我们能恢复我们的对话。经济合作方面的潜力是很多。我希望我们尽快能利用起来。另外一点就是要强调的，我觉得是澳大利亚一个特点。我们中国学生在这儿是很多，他们是真正国际化的一些专家，他们对西方了解，对澳大利亚了解。有这种学生，有这种人做中间的人是很宝贵的一个。我在这方面能做一些工作，使我心里很高兴，很满意。当时北京的胡同、小地方，我还记得很清楚。